Grab a cup of coffee and start your Sunday with Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life. Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life features stories to inspire, motivate, and empower you. Live your best life now. Listen, learn, think, and decide. Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life. Every Sunday morning at 9 on the Talk of New York, AM 970, The Apple. Visit cyacyl.com.
This is Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life. I'm Joan Herman. Thanks for tuning in. Our guest today is Thea Singer, author of the new book, Stress Less, which was named by the Wall Street Journal as one of the top health books in 2010. Thea has written about health and science for more than 3 decades. She has contributed to the Oprah Magazine, More, Natural Health, Boston, and The Nation. Her byline has also appeared in newspapers such as the Washington Post, the Boston Globe, and the Boston Herald. Good morning, Thea. Thank you for joining us today.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me.
Thea, stress. This is everyone's favorite topic. It's something that we just cannot get enough of talking about for some reason. We know that stress is bad for our health. And in your book, you tell us that it can actually age us. In Stress Less, you tell us that stress is the new biological clock. So before we get into the research and the findings of your book, can you just tell us what exactly is stress and what does it do to us on a physical level?
Okay, that's a huge question and a really important question. Stress is actually good for us if we have it in small amounts. Acute stress, as the scientists term it, is when we experience a challenge, when we're excited, when we're revved up. Sex has even been found in scientific studies to be a form of good stress. When we get ourselves into trouble is when the stress is chronic, and I'll tell you why. We've known forever, it seems, that stress can make us sick, that it can contribute to cardiovascular disease, immune system disorders, gastrointestinal disorders. And what happens when we're chronically stressed is that the primary stress hormone called cortisol stays at elevated levels and bathes our cells. And this is very, very bad for us. In fact, if you've noticed, when you're chronically stressed, you probably have trouble remembering things because cortisol does a number on your brain cells. It actually makes the brain cells kind of cringe. The dendrites, which are one of the fibers that reach out to pass messages from brain cell to brain cell, coils in on itself when it's exposed to intense stress.
And Thea, to interrupt you for a moment, that's something that I was not aware of, and it answers a lot of questions for me. I took your brain on stress test, and we're going to talk about this later. And I just want you to know I received a 30, so this is not a good thing. So yes, we're going to talk about that later on.
It happens to all of us, really. The good news is that if the stress is reduced, that those dendrites kind of stretch their limbs and come back to the blossomed state they were in before. The new science that has come out is looking at not only the fact that stress can make us ill, but that stress can actually make us old. And I'm going to explain that to you. It sprang from the work of Nobel laureate Elizabeth Blackburn and UCSF health psychologist Alyssa Epel, and they were looking at the effect of chronic stress on our very cells. Now, in our cells, in the nucleus, lie our chromosomes. And on our chromosomes lies our DNA. That's the very substance of our being. It controls everything that's going on in our bodies and who we are. At the ends of the chromosomes, protecting that DNA, are little caps. Think of the plastic tips on the end of shoelaces. Those tips are there to keep the shoelaces from fraying. Well, these little caps on the end of our chromosomes are there for the very same reason, to protect our genetic material. These caps are called telomeres. Now, when cells divide, not all of them do, but skin cells do, immune cells do, when they divide, the telomere gets a little bit shorter. And that has led scientists to look at telomere length as a marker of biological aging. What Blackburn and Epel found was that in people who were chronically stressed, their telomeres were shorter by the equivalent of 10 years than those who were not perceiving themselves as being so stressed.
So we want these telomeres to be long and thin. Can we make the telomeres grow, or is there a maximum size to them?
Telomere telomere length is partly genetically determined, but there are things that we can do, science has shown, that correlate with longer telomeres. For instance, there was a study that found that men whose telomeres lengthened over a period of 5 years had higher levels of omega-3 fatty acids in their blood. So telomeres can get shorter, they can stay the same, and it turns out they can also lengthen. People who exercise, who do a moderate intensity aerobic exercise, what the CDC recommends, actually have telomeres that are longer than those who are sedentary. There was a study looking at intense meditation. People went on an intense meditation retreat, and what was found was that this enzyme that lengthens telomeres, it's called telomerase, was higher in those who'd been on the meditation retreat.
Now, Thea, Dr. Christian Northrup, who actually was a recent guest on our show, she said that your book provides life-changing information. So what is so new about these findings? Is this something that people have not really looked into before?
It is new. What people had not looked into before was the effect of stress on the aging of our cells. They'd looked at how stress affected, again, our health and disease. But there hadn't been that direct link before to stress and actual physical aging. And that's what was so remarkable. And the field of telomere science and telomere research has really been exploding since Blackburn and Eppel's study came out.
So we know what happens to the telomeres from stress. And is there research to support the fact that we can reverse or correct what it is that we've done to ourselves?
There is research, and a few of the studies I just cited, among them was that one showing that these men who had higher levels of omega-3 fatty acids in their blood, their telomeres lengthened over a period of 5 years, which of course led me to jump upstairs and take more of my omega-3 fatty acid. You can also find it, in oil-rich foods like sardines and salmon. Exercise has been found not only to correlate with longer telomeres, but also to correlate with increased brain growth. For a long time, scientists thought that once you were an adult, you could not grow new brain cells. It's called neurogenesis. But science has since revealed that, yes, through exercise, that new brain cells can be born. And I have to tell you that that's what I visualize when I'm on the elliptical at my club. Mm-hmm. I'm picturing new reinforcements, new gray matter in my brain, and I'm also picturing new reinforcements to my muscle cells because another study done by a scientist named Mark Tarnopolsky in Canada found that through resistance exercise, older adults actually change the genetic profile of their muscle cells to look more like that of younger people.
Now, Thea, let me just ask if I'm correct in this. Exercise, but you're talking about moderate exercise, because isn't over-exercising a stressor?
Yes. What I'm talking about is moderate intensity exercise. The CDC had new guidelines that came out in 2008. And interestingly, their guidelines correlated with the amount of exercise scientists had found people with the longer telomeres were doing. So it was 150 to 300 minutes a week of moderate intensity aerobic exercise. There have been studies looking at over-exercising and telomere length, and there could be a negative effect from that. So, but we're talking really extreme amounts of exercise. People who had exercised over longer periods of time also had longer telomeres. So this is really exciting news. We don't want to overdo it. We want to do moderate intensity to maybe moderate intensity with a little bit of a push, and the CDC lays out those two ways to address our exercise needs.
Thea, what I'd like to do now is talk about your book and maybe just go through the different parts of it, because what I like that you've done in your book is that you've made it a very personal program. And I mentioned earlier that I took one of your tests, and I think, if I understand this correctly, what you're trying to do through the book is give us a very creative way to individualize a plan for each of ourselves based on our own needs and our own stresses. And before we get into that, let me ask you, why did you approach it in this way? Why did you not think that the one-size-fits-all kind of approach should be the way to go?
you've hit on a really, really crucial point, and I'm so excited to hear you say that. What's been found scientifically is that, think about it, what is stress, right? There's really no such thing as objective stress. It's how we perceive events. There are certain events that occur, your pipes burst in the middle of winter, that everybody would say, yes, that's a stressor.
Thea, if I can interrupt for a moment, because I love this statistic that you put in the book. Stress is 10% of what happens to us in life, the uncontrollable part, and 90% of how we react to the circumstances.
Absolutely, and that's what it's about. It's how we perceive events. That's why the test in the book and the test that Liz Blackburn and Alyssa Epple used doesn't measure an objective stress. It measures levels of perceived stress. And in those women who were chronically stressed, they were caring for a child with a chronic disease, it had to do, the telomere length correlated with their level of perceived stress. They were all in the same circumstance. They were all caring for children with chronic diseases, but those who perceived themselves as being under less stress had the telomeres that were 10 years, the equivalent of 10 years longer than those who perceived themselves under the most stress. So we cannot change circumstances. We can change how we look at circumstances, and control. Our feeling that we have a sense of control is crucial. When we're stressed, we feel overwhelmed. We feel out of control. And what I attempted to do in the book was not lay out a regimen or a program. I wasn't going to take control. The people reading my book are smart people. They know their lives. They know what works for them. I wanted to put in their hands some choices, and then they could decide what particular interventions they were going to do that worked for them.
Well, and Thea, on that note, because I love what you just said, it supports this show, Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life. So on that note, we're going to let our listeners think about that while we take a short break for our sponsors. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life now has a monthly free digital magazine that can be mailed to your inbox or read online at cyacyl.com. Each month, nationally recognized leaders in their fields, such as Joel Osteen, Shaun T., Tanya Brown, Ed and Deb Shapiro, Food Network's Robert Irvine, plus many others, provide the tools that you need to inspire and motivate you. We believe in a holistic approach to life, incorporating mind, body, and spirit. As philosopher Francis Bacon said, knowledge is power. Take the wisdom provided in the publication and apply it to your everyday life. Visit cyacyl.com for more information or to begin your free subscription. That's cyacyl.com. Welcome back to Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life. I'm Joan Herman, and our guest today is author Thea Singer. Thea's new book, Stress Less, teaches us that stress can age us all the way down to the cellular level. Thea, before break, we were talking about how it's our perception and our attitude that can really impact our overall health. And let me ask you, in your book, you have these tests that readers can take. And as I mentioned earlier, I did a few of the tests. One I did was my brain on stress. And I have to tell you that I never made the connection that it was due to the stress. I've been under a tremendous stress the past year. And from that, I find that I have memory loss. I can't find words. I misplace things. My kids laugh that I'm going to be getting those eyeglasses with the chain pretty soon. So I know we laugh, but I never made the connection with stress. I thought it was more hormonal, just getting older. But this really hit when I scored a 30 on your test. And then I did a test on sleep deprivation because, again, that's another area. I get 6 hours a night of sleep. And so when you put all of this information together, it does create a plan. So if we could, let's go through the different steps that people can take to change some of these things in their lives. So first of all, what would be the first recommendation that you would say to people? What's the first thing that they need to work on?
I would say if they don't have time to work on many of these interventions that I introduce, I would say that exercise is really, scientists have said to me, if you could put exercise in pill form, that would be something of a fountain of youth. It makes a huge, huge difference. It not only affects your body, it affects your brain. But what you want to remember, and this goes along with the idea concerning control that I mentioned before, you want to be doing something that you enjoy. There have been studies that looked at involuntary exercise with animals and found that involuntary exercise, forced first exercise, your inner drill sergeant, actually boosts levels of the stress hormone cortisol. So you want to find something that you enjoy doing. I, for instance, lay out a little extra money so I can go to a health club where there are widescreen TVs because I don't get to watch movies. I'm a full-time writer and I have a 12-year-old. So for me, that is incredibly enjoyable. I do love how I feel when I'm working out, but that's an extra incentive to get me there.
See, that's something I never thought about. We do these exercise programs, and let's say we're doing something so intensive that the entire time we're doing it, we're thinking, oh, I'm not doing this right, or, again, we're stressing ourselves.
I can't wait till it's over.
Yeah. Where's the fun in that? So exercise is important. Diet. I know in your book you talk about the importance of pistachio nuts and omega-3s. Why and what else would you recommend?
There aren't that many foods out there that scientifically have been proven to directly affect stress. We all hear about turkey and tryptophan, but that does not stand up to scientific scrutiny. The pistachio nuts are really fascinating to me. A scientist named Sheila West did a study looking at vascular stress, how our blood vessels respond to stressors, both emotional and physical. And what she found was that those who were eating pistachio nuts, it was 1.5 to 3 ounces of shelled pistachio nuts a day, that their blood vessels' response to stressors was actually reduced, and this in turn led to lower blood pressure, lower levels of triglycerides, and lower levels of the bad cholesterol. Another thing that's really important to remember, and this is kind of a theme throughout the book, is mindfulness and applying mindfulness to all aspects of your life. It's not just what you eat, it's how you eat. And there have been studies, this has not even been published yet, that Alyssa Epple did with some other scientists that showed that women who went on a mindful eating program, they didn't diet, they went on a mindful eating program that was established by a woman named Jean Christeller at Indiana State, and your listeners can look this up. They actually lost weight, and not only did they lose weight, even though they weren't dieting, they lost it in their bellies, and your belly is the worst place for your health, for you to carry excess weight.
Thea, what is mindful eating?
Mindful eating is when you assess your body state before you start to eat. Am I really hungry, or am I bored, or am I nervous, or do I just want a flavor in my mouth? And you determine whether it is that you really are hungry or if there's something else that you might need. And it also pertains to the way that you eat. John Kabat-Zinn developed an exercise in which he has people eat 3 raisins and take about 15 minutes to do so. And if you hear him describing, and I talk about it in the book and I go through and describe the procedure in the book, it almost sounds pornographic because you're really experiencing the shape, the flavor, the texture of each individual raisin, and you're also experiencing your mouth sensations, what's going on in your mind, what you're looking at. So you're very, very, very aware. It's a kind of state of heightened awareness.
Okay, so we've talked about exercise, we've talked about diet. I briefly mentioned sleep, but again, this is important because you talk about it having a sharp memory, reducing cravings for junk food. I'd love to hear why that happens, and about the belly fat. So can you tell us why proper sleep is important, and how much sleep do we need?
The amount of sleep that each of us needs varies, but the general amount is about 7 to 8 hours per night. And one thing that's really important is so often, and I do this as well, we put sleep kind of on the back burner. I can get away with sleeping X number of hours. But what's really important is that we look at sleep and the appropriate amount of sleep to feel refreshed as essential as, say, the amount of time we need to wash the soap off in the shower. You wouldn't step out of the shower with soap all over you. Well, you shouldn't be getting up out of bed before you've had enough sleep that can really refresh you. Sleep deprivation does an incredible number on our hormone balance, on our ability to remember, on memory consolidation, because it's while you're in deep, slow-wave sleep that memories are being formed. Regarding the hormones, for instance, there's a hormone called leptin that tells us when we're full, and there's another hormone called ghrelin that tells us when we're hungry. And what happens when we don't get enough sleep is those hormones are totally thrown out of whack, and the leptin goes down. And so even though our bodies don't need more food, we think that we do. I remember when I was in college, I used to pull all-nighters, and I would be famished in the morning, and I thought, oh, well, I worked really hard. I burned off a lot of energy. Well, the fact of the matter was I hadn't. I'd been sitting there, but my leptin was thrown out of whack, and so I was hungry, even though my cells, my body itself, really wasn't hungry. And that, again, if you don't get enough sleep, those calories, that fat goes directly to your belly, which really contributes to inflammation throughout your whole body.
Thea, does it matter what hours of the night you sleep? Is it best to sleep from 11 to 6 or 2 to 10? Does it make a difference?
You know, that's a really good question, and I didn't specifically investigate that, but we do have circadian rhythms, and our cortisol, our stress hormone, is keyed in to work with those. And this is one reason that people, for instance, there have been studies done on flight attendants, and they suffer from jet lag, and they might be sleeping at these very peculiar hours, and that can throw us out of whack. I can't point to exact hours, but there is a natural circadian rhythm, and it is best to stick with that. I also make a recommendation if you have trouble sleeping, and this was really fascinating to me. It was from a woman named Jessica Payne, who's now at Notre Dame. She's a psychologist and stress and sleep expert, and she advises that people take a hot bath 90 minutes before bed if they think they're going to have sleep problems. And the mechanism that kicks in is called thermoregulation. When you get into the tub, your body temperature goes up. When you step out, it rapidly goes down. And your body temperature has to be low in order to slip into deep, slow-wave sleep, which is the most restful kind of sleep there is.
Thea, we had mentioned before about cortisol, and one thing that I find interesting, when people are under tremendous stress and they're not eating, they always think they're going to lose weight, but sometimes I know people that actually have gained weight. Is that strictly because of cortisol, or is something else happening?
Well, cortisol contributes to our eating more. So, and this is why people eat when they're stressed, has a lot to do with cortisol. And not only do they eat, but they eat preferentially junky, crunchy, fatty stuff. And there's an evolutionary reason that we eat when we're stressed. Think about it. This whole stress system, fight or flight, and what I call the cortisol boost, exists in order to keep us alive. You know, picture a hunter-gatherer out on the tundra and he spies a moose. He has to either kill the thing or he has to flee to safety. And so the systems that need to be really revved up and turned on, those are the ones where the glucose goes. The cortisol kicks in so glucose can go where it's needed. It goes to his brain so he can have razor-sharp attention. It goes to his thighs so that he can either run after the moose or he can run up a tree. And once the stressor is over, he catches the moose and slings it over his shoulder for dinner or has raced home, it's time to replenish those energy stores that were used. And that's why we get hungry when a stressor has passed. The problem is that these days stressors are constant. Not only that, they're not physical. They're in our heads. We're ruminating. We're sitting in a traffic jam. So we're not using up the extra energy, the extra glucose, but our body doesn't know that. And so then we go and we find something sweet and fatty to eat. And that's also an evolutionary drive because sweet, fatty foods are easily converted into glucose. So this is why our bodies work this way. Now, cortisol also kicks off the reward center in our brain. That's the same center that's kicked off when people do drugs of abuse. It's not to the same degree, but it is the same kind of response. And then that kicking off of the reward center, dopamine, makes us go and crave and seek out these sweet, fatty foods. We eat the sweet, fatty foods, and that kicks off our opioid system. So it becomes this kind of never-ending cycle. What I talk about in my book is if you pick up a carrot when you're stressed, that's not going to do the trick for you. That's not going to kick off your reward center. But think about something else that brings you pleasure. Going for a mindful walk, for instance. For me, it's exercising. Calling up a friend. Social support is crucial for reducing stress. So these are things that do kick off your pleasure and reward center, but they're not going to add weight to your belly.
The book is Stress Less by Thea Singer. Learn how to stop or reverse the effects of stress on your health. As Thea said, stress is the new biological clock. So don't forget, Stress Less by Thea Singer. Thea, it was great having you here today. If our listeners would like more information about Thea Singer, you can check out our website, which is cyacyl.com, which stands for Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life. While on our website, please read our digital magazine, listen to past shows as podcasts, and sign up for our mailing list. Thea, again, it was great having you here. I love the book. I learned so much from it. I recommend everyone get a copy, Stress Less, and I wish you much success with the sale of the book.
Thank you so much. It's been really great talking to you.
This is Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life. I'm Joan Herman. Thanks for tuning in.